Welcome to Slothful Slumber, the podcast where we transform the vast knowledge of the internet into a gentle lullaby for your mind. I'm your host, Luna Dreamwell, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to tranquility through the soothing cadence of Wikipedia articles. Each episode will delve into the most wonderfully mundane and sleep-inducing topics, helping you drift off into a realm of serene dreams. So find your comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the dull hum of information carry you into a restful slumber. Now, let's embark on tonight's voyage of tranquil learning as we explore a topic so peacefully uneventful, it just might whisk you away to the land of dreams. This Wikipedia article is titled Indian Philosophy. Indian philosophy consists of philosophical traditions of the Indian subcontinent. A traditional Hindu classification divides Astika and Nastika schools of philosophy, depending on one of three alternate criteria: whether it believes the Vedas as a valid source of knowledge, whether the school believes in the premises of Brahman and Atman, and whether the school believes in afterlife and devas. There are 6 major Astika schools of Vedic philosophy: Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta, and 5 major heterodox Nastika or Shramanic schools: Jain, Buddhist, Ajivika, Ajnana, and Charvaka. The Astika group embraces the Vedas as an essential source of its foundations, while the Nastika group does not. However, there are other methods of classification. Vidyaranya, for instance, identifies 16 schools of Indian philosophy by including those that belong to the Shaiva and Raseshvara traditions. The main schools of Indian philosophy were formalized and recognized chiefly between 500 BCE and the late centuries of the Common Era. Some schools like Jainism, Buddhism, Yoga, Shaiva, and Vedanta survived, but others like Ajnana, Charvaka, and Ajivika did not. Ancient and medieval era texts of Indian philosophies include extensive discussions on ontology, metaphysics, Brahman Atman, Sunyata Anatta, reliable means of knowledge, epistemology, pramanas, value system, axiology, and other topics. Common themes. Indian philosophies share many concepts such as dharma, karma, samsara, dukkha, renunciation, meditation, with almost all of them focusing on the ultimate goal of liberation of the individual from dukkha and samsara through diverse range of spiritual practices, moksha, nirvana. They differ in their assumptions about the nature of existence, as well as the specifics of the path to the ultimate liberation, resulting in numerous schools that disagreed with each other. Their ancient doctrines span the diverse range of philosophies found in other ancient cultures. Hindu traditions. Some of the earliest surviving Indian philosophical texts are the Upanishads of the later Vedic period, 1000 to 500 BCE, which are considered to preserve the ideas of Brahmanism. Indian philosophical traditions are commonly grouped according to their relationship to the Vedas and the ideas contained in them. Jainism and Buddhism originated at the end of the Vedic period, while the various traditions grouped under Hinduism mostly emerged after the Vedic period as independent traditions. Hindu philosophy classify Indian philosophical traditions as either orthodox, Astika, or heterodox, Nastika, depending on whether they accept the authority of the Vedas and the theories of Brahman and Atman found therein. Besides these, the heterodox schools that do not accept the authority of the Vedas include Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika, and Charvaka. This orthodox-heterodox terminology is a scholarly construct found in later Indian sources and in Western sources on Indian thought, and not all of these sources agree on which system should be considered orthodox. As such, there are various heresiological systems in Indian philosophy. Some traditions see orthodox as a synonym for theism and heterodox as a synonym for atheism. Other Hindu sources argue that certain systems of Shaiva Tantra should be considered heterodox due to its deviations from the Vedic tradition. One of the most common list of Hindu orthodox schools is the 6 philosophies, Sad Darshana, which are Samkhya, school of enumeration, a philosophical tradition which regards the universe as consisting of 2 independent realities, Purusa, the perceiving consciousness, and Prakriti, perceived reality, including mind, perception, kleshas, and matter, and which describes a soteriology based on this duality, in which Purush is discerned and disentangled from the impurities of Prakriti. It has included atheistic authors as well as some theistic thinkers, and forms the basis of much of subsequent Indian philosophy. Yoga, a school similar to Samkhya, or perhaps even a branch of it, which accepts a personal God and focuses on yogic practice. Nyaya, the logic school, a philosophy which focuses on logic and epistemology. It accepts 4 kinds of prama, valid presentation. 1. Perception. 2. Inference. 3. Comparison or analogy. 4. Word or testimony. Nyaya defends a form of direct realism and a theory of substances, dravya. Vaishesika, the school of characteristics, closely related to the Nyaya school. This tradition focused on the metaphysics of substance and on defending a theory of atoms. Unlike Nyaya, they only accept 2 pramanas, perception and inference. Purva Mimamsa, the school of prior investigation of the Vedas, a school which focuses on exegesis of the Vedas, philology, and the interpretation of Vedic ritual. Vedanta, the end of the Vedas, also called Uttara Mimamsa, focuses on interpreting the philosophy of the Upanishads, particularly the soteriological and metaphysical ideas relating to Atman and Brahman. Sometimes these 6 are coupled into 3 groups for both historical and conceptual reasons: Nyaya Vaishesika, Samkhya Yoga, and Mimamsa Vedanta. Each tradition also included different currents and subschools. For example, Vedanta was divided among the subschools of Advaita, non-dualism, Visishtadvaita, qualified non-dualism, Dvaita, dualism, Dvaitadvaita, dualistic non-dualism, Suddhadvaita, pure non-dualism, and Akintya Bheda Abheda, inconceivable oneness and difference. The doctrines of the Vedas and Upanishads were interpreted differently by these 6 schools, with varying degrees of overlap. They represent a collection of philosophical views that share a textual connection, according to Chadha 2015. They also reflect a tolerance for a diversity of philosophical interpretations within Hinduism while sharing the same foundation. Hindu philosophers of the orthodox schools developed systems of epistemology, pramana, and investigated topics such as metaphysics, ethics, psychology, guna, hermeneutics, and soteriology within the framework of the Vedic knowledge, while presenting a diverse collection of interpretations. The commonly named six orthodox schools were the competing philosophical traditions of what has been called the Hindu synthesis of classical Hinduism. All these systems are not the only orthodox systems of philosophy, as numerous sub-schools developed throughout the history of Hindu thought. They are, however, the most well-known Hindu philosophical traditions. In addition to the six systems, the Hindu philosopher Vidyaranya, circa 1374 to 1380, also includes several further Hindu philosophical systems in his Sarvadarshana Samgraha, a compendium of all the philosophical systems. Pashupata, a school of Shaivism founded by Nakulisa. Saiva Siddhanta, a theistic and dualistic school of Shaivism, which is influenced by Samkhya and expands the Samkhya system further. Pratyabhijna, the school of recognition, which defends an idealistic monism and part of the Kashmir Shaivism tradition of Tantric Shaivism. Panini Darshana, a tradition focusing on Sanskrit linguistics and grammar, which also developed the theory of Sfotavada under Bhartrhari, a theory which places speech and sound at the center of its metaphysics. Raseshvara, an alchemical school which advocated the use of mercury as a way to attain enlightenment. Shramanic traditions. Several non-Vedic traditions of thought also flourished in ancient India, and they developed their own philosophical systems. The Shramana movement included various traditions which did not accept the Brahmanical religion of the Vedas. These non-Vedic schools gave rise to a diverse range of ideas about topics like the Atman, atomism, ethics, materialism, atheism, agnosticism, free will, asceticism, family life, ahimsa, nonviolence, and vegetarianism. Notable philosophies that arose from the Shramana movement were Jainism, early Buddhism, Charvaka, Ajnana, and Ajivika. Indian Shramana movements became prominent in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, and even more so during the Mauryan period, circa 322 to 184 BCE. Jainism and Buddhism were especially influential. These traditions influenced all later forms of Indian philosophy, who either adopted some of their ideas or reacted against them. Jain philosophy. Jain philosophy is the oldest Indian philosophy that separates body, matter, from the soul, consciousness, completely. Jainism was revived and re-established after Mahavira, the last and the 24th Tirthankara, synthesized and revived the philosophies and promulgations of the ancient Shramanic traditions laid down by the first Jain Tirthankara Rishabhanatha millions of years ago. According to Dundas, outside of the Jain tradition, historians date the Mahavira as about contemporaneous with the Buddha in the 5th century BCE, and accordingly the historical Parshvanatha, based on the 250-year gap, is placed in 8th or 7th century BCE. Jainism is a Shramanic religion and rejected the authority of the Vedas. However, like all Indian religions, it shares the core concepts such as karma, ethical living, rebirth, samsara, and moksha. Jainism places strong emphasis on asceticism, ahimsa, nonviolence, and anikantavada, relativity of viewpoints, as a means of spiritual liberation, ideas that influenced other Indian traditions. Jainism strongly upholds the individualistic nature of soul and personal responsibility for one's decisions, and that self-reliance and individual efforts alone are responsible for one's liberation. According to the Jain philosophy, the world, samsara, is full of himsa, violence. Therefore, one should direct all his efforts in attainment of Ratnatraya, that are samyak darshan, right perception, samyak gnana, right knowledge, and samyak charitra, right conduct, which are the key requisites to attain liberation. Buddhist philosophy. Buddhist philosophy refers to several traditions which can be traced back to the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, awakened one. Buddhism is a Shramana religion, but it contains novel ideas not found or accepted by other Shramana religions, such as the Buddhist doctrine of not-self, anatta. Buddhist thought is also influenced by the thought of the Upanishads. Buddhism and Hinduism mutually influenced each other and shared many concepts. However, it is now difficult to identify and describe these influences. Buddhism rejected the Vedic concepts of Brahman, ultimate reality, and Atman, soul, self, at the foundation of Hindu philosophies. Buddhism shares many philosophical views with other Indian systems, such as belief in karma, a cause and effect relationship, samsara, ideas about cyclic afterlife and rebirth, dharma, ideas about ethics, duties and values, impermanence of all material things and of body, and possibility of spiritual liberation, nirvana or moksha. A major departure from Hindu and Jain philosophy is the Buddhist rejection of an eternal soul, Atman, in favor of anatta, non-self. After the death of the Buddha, several competing philosophical systems termed Abhidharma began to emerge as ways to systematize Buddhist philosophy. Schools of thought. The main traditions of Buddhist philosophy in India, from 300 BCE to 1000 CE, can be divided into Mahayana schools and non-Mahayana schools, sometimes called Shravakayana schools, Nikaya Buddhism, mainstream Buddhism or Hinayana, inferior or lesser vehicle, a term used only in Mahayana to refer to non-Mahayana traditions. The Mahayana schools accepted the Mahayana Sutras and studied the works of Mahayana philosophers like Nagarjuna. The non-Mahayana schools drew their philosophical doctrines from the Tripitaka and on the Abhidharma treatises. Shravakayana schools, non-Mahayana. The Mahasamhika, great community tradition, which included numerous sub-schools, all are now extinct. A key doctrine of this tradition was the supramundane and transcendent nature of the Buddha, Lokottaravada. The schools of the Stavira, elders, tradition. Vaibhasika, commentators, also known as the Sarvastivada Vaibhashika, was an Abhidharma tradition that composed the great commentary, Mahavibhasa. They were known for their defense of the doctrine of Sarvastitva, all exists, which is a form of eternalism regarding the philosophy of time. They also supported direct realism and a theory of substances, svabhava. Sautrantika, those who uphold the sutras, a tradition which did not see the northern Abhidharma as authoritative, and instead focused on the Buddhist sutras. They disagreed with the Vaibhasika on several key points, including their eternalistic theory of time, their direct realism, and their realist theory of nirvana. Pudgalavada, personalists, which were known for their controversial theory of the person, Pudgala, which is what undergoes rebirth and attain awakening. They are now extinct. Vibhajavada, the Analysts, a widespread tradition which reached Kashmir, South India, and Sri Lanka. A part of this school has survived into the modern era as the Southeast Asian Theravada tradition. Their orthodox positions can be found in the Kathavatu. They rejected the views of the Pudgalavada and of the Vaibhasika, among others. Mahayana traditions. The Mahayana Great Vehicle movement, circa 1st century BCE onwards, included new ideas and scriptures, Mahayana Sutras. These philosophical traditions differ significantly from other schools of Buddhism and include metaphysical doctrines which are not accepted by the other Buddhist traditions. Mahayana thought focuses on the universal altruistic ideal of the Bodhisattva, a being who is on the path to Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. It also defends the doctrine that there are limitless number of Buddhas throughout limitless numbers of universes. These Indian traditions are the main source of modern Tibetan Buddhism and of modern East Asian Buddhism. The main Indian Mahayana schools of philosophy are Madhyamaka, middle way or centrism, founded by Nagarjuna, also known as Shunyavada, the emptiness doctrine, and Nisvabhavavada, the no Svabhava doctrine. This tradition focuses on the idea that all phenomena are empty of any essence or substance, Svabhava. Yogacara, yoga praxis, an idealistic school which held that only consciousness exists, and thus was also known as Vijnanavada, the doctrine of consciousness. The Dignaga Dharmakirti tradition is an influential school of thought which focused on epistemology, or pramana, means of knowledge. They generally followed the doctrine of Vijnanavada. Some scholars see the Tathagata Garbha, Buddha womb source, or Buddha nature texts as constituting a third school of Indian Mahayana thought. Many of these philosophies were brought to other regions, like Central Asia and China. After the disappearance of Buddhism from India, some of these philosophical traditions continued to develop in the Tibetan Buddhist, East Asian Buddhist, and Theravada Buddhist traditions. Ajivika philosophy. The philosophy of Ajivika was founded by Makali Gosala. It was a Shramana movement and a major rival of early Buddhism and Jainism. Ajivikas were organized renunciates who formed discrete monastic communities prone to an ascetic and simple lifestyle. Original scriptures of the Ajivika school of philosophy may once have existed, but these are currently unavailable and probably lost. Their theories are extracted from mentions of Ajivikas in the secondary sources of ancient Indian literature, particularly those of Jainism and Buddhism, which polemically criticized the Ajivikas. The Ajivika school is known for its niyati doctrine of absolute determinism, fate, the premise that there is no free will, that everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen is entirely preordained and a function of cosmic principles. Ajivika considered the karma doctrine as a fallacy. Ajivikas were atheists and rejected the authority of the Vedas, but they believed that in every living being is an Atman, a central premise of Hinduism and Jainism. Charvaka philosophy. Charvaka, also known as Lokayata, is an ancient school of Indian materialism. Charvaka holds direct perception, empiricism, and conditional inference as proper sources of knowledge, embraces philosophical skepticism, and rejects ritualism and supernaturalism. It was a popular belief system in ancient India. The etymology of Charvaka is uncertain. Bhattacharya quotes the grammarian Hemakandra to the effect that the word karvaka is derived from the root karv, to chew. A karvaka chews the self, karvatiyat manam karvaka. Brihaspati is traditionally referred to as the founder of Charvaka or Lokayata philosophy, although some scholars dispute this. During the Hindu Reformation period in the first millennium BCE, when Buddhism was established by Gautama Buddha and Jainism was reorganized by Parshvanatha, the Charvaka philosophy was well documented and opposed by both religions. Much of the primary literature of Charvaka, the Barhaspatya Sutras, were lost either due to waning popularity or other unknown reasons. Its teachings have been compiled from historic secondary literature, such as those found in the Shastras, Sutras, and the Indian epic poetry, as well as in the dialogues of Gautama Buddha and from Jain literature. However, there is text that may belong to the Charvaka tradition, written by the skeptic philosopher Jayarashi Bhatta, known as the Tattvopaplava Simha, that provides information about this school, albeit unorthodox. One of the widely studied principles of Charvaka philosophy was its rejection of inference as a means to establish valid, universal knowledge and metaphysical truths. In other words, the Charvaka epistemology states that whenever one infers a truth from a set of observations or truths, one must acknowledge doubt. Inferred knowledge is conditional. Political philosophy. The Arthashastra, attributed to the Mauryan minister Chanakya, is one of the early Indian texts devoted to political philosophy. It is dated to 4th century BCE and discusses ideas of statecraft and economic policy. The Khural text, attributed to Valavar and dated to around 5th century CE, deals with ahimsa and morality, extending them to political philosophy and love. The political philosophy most closely associated with modern India is the one of ahimsa, nonviolence, and satyagraha, popularized by Mahatma Gandhi during the Indian struggle for independence. In turn, it influenced the later independence and civil rights movements, especially those led by Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar's progressive utilization theory is also a major socio-economic and political philosophy. Integral humanism was a set of concepts drafted by Upadhyaya as political program and adopted in 1965 as the official doctrine of the Jan Sangh. Upadhyaya considered that it was of utmost importance for India to develop an indigenous economic model with the human being at center stage. This approach made this concept different from socialism and capitalism. Integral humanism was adopted as Jan Sangh's political doctrine, and its new openness to other opposition forces made it possible for the Hindu nationalist movement to have an alliance in the early 1970s with the prominent Gandhian Sarvodaya movement going on under the leadership of J.P. Narayan. This was considered to be the first major public breakthrough for the Hindu nationalist movement. Influence. In appreciation of subtlety and truth of the Indian philosophy, T.S. Eliot wrote that the great philosophers of India make most of the great European philosophers look like schoolboys. Arthur Schopenhauer used Indian philosophy to improve upon Kantian thought. In the preface to his book, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer writes that one who has also received and assimilated the sacred primitive Indian wisdom, then he is the best of all, prepared to hear what I have to say to him. The 19th century American philosophical movement, Transcendentalism, was also influenced by Indian thought.